Hello everyone and welcome to the Rookie Reporters YouTube channel. I'm Sophie and today I'm going to be talking you through everything that happened in Formula 2 and Formula 1 at the Barcelona Grand Prix race weekend. The drivers raced on the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya, which is 4.657 kilometers long, with the first race being held in 1991. The drivers raced 66 laps around the track, with the fastest lap being held in 2025 by Oscar Piastri, who did a 1 minute 15.743. In Formula 2, the drivers raced 26 laps in the sprint and then 37 laps in the feature race, with the fastest lap being held by Ollie Bearman, who raced with Prix in 2023 with a 1 minute 23.546. So if we start off at F2, their first race at this circuit was in 2017, with the most recent winner being Arvid Lindbergh for Campos Racing last year. So if we start off with practice and qualifying day, which was the Friday, nothing much happened in FP1 other than the fact that Noel Leon had crashed into turn 3 and caused a red flag after he ran wide and kicked up dust and then spun into the gravel. But other than the crash, it was a pretty calm session, with Trident driver Laurens van Hoopen getting first with a 1 minute 26.776, followed by Roman Belinsky for Dance Lucas Oil and then Alex Dunn in third for Rodin Motorsport. However, something that hasn't been seen as much was that the top 14 drivers were all within half a second of each other. So moving on to qualifying, the first thing that we saw was that Solov got noted for a pit lane infringement, which was investigated after the session. When this was investigated, nothing happened, so there was no penalty involved. And then High Tech managed to pull their cars into first and third, with Colton Herta being ahead with Rotomo Miata in third early on into the session. However, this look ended for Rotomo Miata as he caused a red flag with 3 minutes left of the session as he ran into the barrier at the last corner. During the red flag, we also saw Alex Dunn, Oliver Gove and Mary Boyer all have lap times deleted due to exceeding track limits, and Joshua Dirksen was noted for a yellow flag infringement, which will be investigated after the session. So at the end of the qualifying session, it was an Invicta front row lockout, with Rafa Kamara grabbing back-to-back poles with teammate Joshua Dirksen in second. However, we had people like Stenshorn, Belinsky and Van Hoopen not make the top 15. However, the victory for Invicta would be short-lived, as Joshua Dirksen had gained a 5-place grid penalty for not slowing down in the yellow flag zone after Miata's crash. So moving on to the sprint on Saturday, there were a few changes to the grid before the race actually happened. We had Miata, who was starting last due to being the sole cause of a red flag, which the rule states that if you cause a red flag, your fastest lap time will be deleted. And then we have Dirksen starting 14th instead of 9th, as he failed to slow down after the red flags were brought out after the crash. So off the line, we saw Nikola Solov take third place from Cadillac reserve driver Colton Herta, and then Stenshorn gained a 10-second time penalty for colliding with Dirksen. So further on into the race, we saw Laurens van Hoopen run off the track and drop down to last, with Villa-Gomez and Belinsky both getting 5-second time penalties for exceeding track limits. A few laps later, they both got another 5-second time penalty for exceeding track limits again. Another time penalty that we saw got handed out was a 5-second time penalty to VAR driver Nico Veroni for leaving the track and gaining an advantage whilst defending from Prima driver Montoya. Ultimately, at the end of the race, we saw an Alpine Junior 1-2 with Kush Miney grabbing the win and then Gabriele Mini in second with Nikola Solov in third. Okay, so now onto the feature race, we saw Joshua Dirksen start down from 7th after his 5-place grid penalty, and Oliver Gove couldn't get his car off the grid for the formation lap, so he moved into the pit lane. So with Kamara being on pole, Alex Dunn ended up getting into the lead as Kamara didn't have a good start, and then on lap 1 there was a safety car due to Oliver Gove being stopped at the end of the pit lane. However, the cars couldn't pit as the pit didn't open until lap 6. Okay, so with Alex Dunn leading the race, he restarted just after turn 12 with the hard tyre starters struggling to find their temperature, and then the race kind of split into 2 races, so we had the soft tyre drivers and then we had the hard tyre drivers. So on lap 7, Villa-Gomez came onto the radio saying that his tyres were already going, but the first pit stop was actually Martinius Stenshorn, who pit on lap 10 from the soft tyres to the hard tyres. Around lap 14, Alex Dunn and Rafa Kamara were both fighting for the lead, and then Alex Dunn pit first with Rafa Kamara staying out. So then 4 laps later, on lap 18, Kamara got called into the pits, but his engineer had changed his mind and said if Kamara could keep the pace that he should stay out and gain the advantage over Dunn. Then on lap 22, he got called into the pits and came in, and then Kamara came out just 5 cars behind Dunn. It was at this part in the race where we saw the hard tyre starters finding their temperature in the tyres, and Solov had took the lead, with Solov and Van Hoopen pitting for softs on lap 23. So moving on to the battle for first, we saw Kamara, who was catching up to Dunn, who was in second place on lap 28, being over a second quicker than him. But whilst this battle was happening, we had Bogdanovic and Villa-Gomez fighting for 4th. As his tyres were heating up and they were fresher, Kamara took the lead soon after on around lap 30, with Nikola Solov on his soft tyres taking the last podium position on lap 34. But then because Solov was on the quicker and softer tyres, he managed to take second place from Alex Dunn, and then Cian Shields got given a 5-second time penalty for exceeding track limits. And then finishing the race, we saw Rafa Kamara grab a win with Invicta Racing, then Nikola Solov for Campos, and then Alex Dunn in third. So moving on to Formula 1, the tyre compounds for this weekend were the C2 being the hard compound, C3 for the medium, and then C4 for softs. So before the weekend, on the Monday after the Monaco Grand Prix, Alpine had requested a right of review for Gasly's missed podium, and then 5 days later they earned the right of review, and then they investigated it with the correct sources, and then Gasly's podium got reinstated. And on the technical side of things, Ferrari had brought 8 upgrades, including Charles Leclerc's changed brakes from Brembo to Carbon Industry that Lewis Hamilton had been using for the previous races after complaining in Monaco that his brakes weren't working all race. Along with Ferrari, Mercedes and McLaren had also brought an upgrade to the Barcelona race. Moving on to FP1, we saw 4 rookie testers take part in the session. So we had Ayumu Iwasa replace Hadjar, Colton Herta in for Perez, Frederick Vesti in for Antonelli, Leonardo Fornaroli for Norris, Paul Aron for Hulkenberg, Luke Browning replacing Sainz, and then Dino Beganovic taking place of Lewis Hamilton. Starting off the session, Carlos Sainz's car would not turn on at the end of the pit lane, so he had to get pushed back into the garage and lost some practice time. Other than that, the session was calm, nothing else happened, so we had George Russell in first with a 1 minute 16.363, Oscar Piastri in second, 2 tenths behind him, and then Charles Leclerc in third, 5 tenths behind George. And then for the rookies, we had Leonardo Fornaroli in fifth, Paul Aron in sixth, 8th we had Dino Beganovic, 14th we had Ayumu Iwasa, 15th Vesti, 21st Herta, and then 22nd Luke Browning, who couldn't go out due to a technical problem with the car. In the break between FP1 and FP2, McLaren had lodged a notice of intention to appeal against Pierre Gasly's podium reinstatement, and Red Bull had joined them. We are yet to hear about that, so any updates will be on our social media. And then Alex Albon had new car components, including a new internal combustion engine, turbocharger, and then the power unit ancillary component. So we had all drivers back out on track, with Alonso noted for crossing the pit exit line and he was given a warning. And then Bottas and Perez were both noted for speeding in the pit lane. And then for Bottas' speeding, Cadillac were fined €100 because he exceeded the limit by 0.5 kilometres an hour. And then Cadillac also fined €500 as Perez exceeded the limit by 4.4 kilometres an hour. And then at the end of the session, Liam Lawson's engine had died on the exit of the pit lane, so the virtual safety car was brought out, and it was because of gearbox related issues. And then ending the session, we had Lando Norris in first with a 1 minute 15.426, George Russell in second, just 9 thousandths behind him, and then Oscar Piastri in third, just 5 hundredths behind him. Moving on to the FP3 session on Saturday, McLaren had broke curfew to make changes to both of their drivers' cars, and then Alpine had changed Gasly's chassis, as they wanted to change a lot of parts but found it was easier to change the chassis. In the actual session, Bottas had a snap out of turn 9 and lost the brakes, which caused a red flag because he was beached in the gravel. And then Antonelli was being investigated after the session for driving erratically, and he had a reprimand and was just told to not do it again. And then Leclerc was noted for impeding Hulkenberg, and he only got a warning as this was only a practice session. So then finishing this session, we had Russell in first with a 1 minute 15.679, Piastri in second, and then Leclerc in third. And later on in the day, we had the qualifying session where we saw Ocon, Albon, Perez, Bottas, Stroll and Alonso get knocked out of Q1. And then in Q2, we had Lindblad, Bortoletto, Colapinto, Gasly, Behrman and Sainz knocked out of Q2. And then the chaos happened in Q3 with 8 minutes left, as there was a red flag as Charles Leclerc went off track at turn 4. This was due to a snap of oversteer on the exit of the long right turn, and then he kicked up dirt and then spun into the gravel and hit the barrier. And the grid order for the race on the Sunday was Russell in first, Hamilton in second, Antonelli in third, then we had Norris, Verstappen, Hadjar, Piastri, Lawson, Hulkenberg and then Leclerc, who didn't set a time. Okay, so finally we reached the race, which was on the Sunday, and then Fernando Alonso had to stop from the pit lane after changing his power unit, and then Kimi Antonelli had to sort out his brakes on the grid after saying that he had a long brake pedal. So then the lights went out and we saw Russell keep the lead into turn 1, and then Charles Leclerc had moved up 3 places within a few corners. Then Hulkenberg and Lindblad were noted for leaving the track and gaining an advantage, but that was not investigated any further. Then on lap 6, Stroll was told to box to retire the car due to a problem with the gearbox. And then Behrman and Hadjar were noted, along with Ocon and Bortoleto, for forcing another driver off the track, but nothing happened to them. Then Alex Albon and then Carlos Sainz were also noted for a starting procedure infringement, which was investigated after the race. This was because the Williams team had left pieces of the car close to the track, and they were fined €5,000 for each car. Then it was Lewis Hamilton who triggered all the pit stops by pitting on lap 12 to go from the soft tyres to the hard tyres, and that made George Russell come into the pits to pit from mediums to hard to cover off from an undercut. Then after some of the pit stops were made, it was Leclerc who was leading the race after Antonelli had gone into the pits. But then he got called into the pits to try and cover Piastri, but Charles said that they don't care about Piastri and they can extend the stint, and they came in 2 laps later on lap 17. So it was at this point of the race where we all thought that Lewis Hamilton was going to go on a 3-stop strategy, as he had pit again just before lap 30. And then on lap 30, Antonelli got given a black and white flag as a warning for track limits, so if he had gone over it again, he would have got a 5-second penalty. So then on lap 31, Nico Hulkenberg retired his car due to the engine just being gone. And then Norris got called into box on lap 36, and then Russell reacted to that to try and defend from the undercut that might have came. Albon had also come into the pits before, but then 11 laps after he came into the pits, he went back out again. So then at this point in the race, Hamilton had took the lead as Russell had pit again to cover off from Norris, and then Alonso had stopped at turn 9, which turned into a virtual safety car. Verstappen took the virtual safety car pit stop, as when you take a pit stop under the virtual safety car, it takes less amount of time because the cars aren't going as quick on track. So then Hamilton took the virtual safety car pit stop when he was leading the race, and he came out just ahead of Russell, but then he was noted for yellow flag infringement, which wasn't investigated any further. Franco Colapinto was also noted for a yellow flag infringement, which would be investigated after the race, and he got a 10-second time penalty for that. One of the bigger shocks of the race is that Antonelli had started to slow down at the beginning of Sector 2, and he stopped his car on the side of the track. Charles Leclerc also had to stop after he went into the gravel at turn 1 and the car hydraulics just went, so he lost the power steering and he had to retire. The race then resumed, and Hamilton managed to pull out a massive gap of 20 seconds between him and Russell, who was in second. Lap 66 came, and it was Lewis Hamilton who took his first win for Ferrari, and Ferrari's first win since Mexico 2024. It was also an all-British podium, with Hamilton finishing in first, Russell in second, and then Norris in third, and Alpine also got double points, with Pierre Gasly in 7th and then Franco Colapinto in 8th. But with Franco Colapinto's time penalty, it dropped him down to 10th place and moved Lawson up to P8 and Arvid Lindblad up to P9. And finally, another penalty that got added was Kimi Antonelli, as he exceeded track limits when he pulled over to retire his car.